Hi, and welcome back to PHP Test-Driven Development with PHPSpec. We're going through Advent of Code. It's been a couple of days, but I'm now starting up on day 2, Corruption Checksum. And today we're given the task of running through a spreadsheet full of numbers that are tab separated and calculating the checksum. We figure out the checksum by looking at each row individually and then figuring out the difference between the largest and the smallest value on that row. And then we take all of those values from each row and add them up, and that total becomes our checksum. So we're given one example here. First row, we take the 9 and the 1, subtract those, we get an 8. We take the second row, the 7 and the 3, subtract those and get a 4. And then finally we look at the 8 and the 2, subtract those and get a 6. We add all of those together and we get our final answer of 18. Let's get down to it. I've made some minor changes to the gulp runner from last time, removed a couple of libraries that I don't think we're actually using. I've updated the commit message, so now it's going to indicate that we're day 2, and I've deleted the auto commit counter file so that we'll start back over with 1. So let's get started. Alright, auto commit is starting. I believe that has created our first commit. And apparently I left some windows open that I didn't intend to. Woo! Yay. Alright, back into Advent of Code. Alright, so we're in branch day 2, and we have not committed this file yet. Oh yeah, it indicates that there. But as soon as we start building some things, that should change. So we're going to describe our class. So we'll do vendor bin PHPSpec describe, and the class that we're going to describe is going to be named Advent Day 2. Let's call it Spreadsheet Checksum. Alright, so now that has created our spec for day 2. We've got our Spreadsheet Checksum spec, and I'm going to execute that, all of our specs right now. And it says, do you want to create it? Yes, we do. And our tests should be passing, and we should be committed, I think. Let's restart that and make sure. Not sure why we're not committing yet. Alright, so we're going to go through, do the needful here, strict types. Oops, that was a little weird. Come on, keyboard. Alright, so it exists, and we save it, and it runs, and everything is happy. So now we need to start describing the behavior. So the way I'd like to go about this is, I think we'll have a spreadsheet checksum, and it's going to use spreadsheet rows to calculate those, and it's going to ask the rows their difference in order to figure that out. So we don't have a row yet. We started with spreadsheet checksum spec, but we're going to add a reference in here. We're going to say that spreadsheet checksum needs to use a spreadsheet row. So let's do that. So we'll do public function. It will total checksums for all rows. Okay. And then I imagine we'll have probably a collection or a set of array of row objects. And let's see, let's just start with 2 of those. So we'll say spreadsheet row 1. So what I'm doing is adding some collaborators here that we don't even know about. But that's okay, because we're going to kind of describe their behavior, and it's going to be awesome. So I want those to be in Advent Day 2 spreadsheet row. So notice I'm using a use statement for a file that doesn't exist, and what PHPSpec is going to do here in just a minute when we run it is it's actually going to build an interface for us, so we can make all the behavior of the spreadsheet checksum without knowing or without having an implemented spreadsheet row yet. So let's run this from the command line. Right. Oh yeah, and we've got to add actually like some behavior for it. So let's say we're going to initialize the spreadsheet checksum or add this row to the spreadsheet checksum. So we'll say this add row 1, this add row 2, and this is right now how I want this thing to work, right? Obviously none of this exists, and then we'll say row 1 get checksum, or get we'll call it get difference. We want the row to get its difference, and we'll say that that one is going to return some random value. We'll go with that, right? So row 1 value equals random int, somewhere between 1 and 10,000, and we're going to return that. And then row 2 get check difference will return row 2 value, which we haven't created yet. So copy that, make a new random value. There we go. So we've got some behavior that we're setting up. This is on a row that doesn't exist with a function that doesn't exist, and we're giving it behavior. And what we want to have happen finally is this get checksum should be the sum of row value 1 plus row value 2, or row 2 value. That's the behavior that I want in my spreadsheet. And what that means is it's going to delegate a lot of that functionality off into the spreadsheet row, and let the spreadsheet row be in charge of calculating its own difference, right? So we run it, and we don't have a spreadsheet row, and we don't have an add row on spreadsheet checksum, so we're going to add that. And then we didn't define get check difference yet, so it's going to add that to the interface. Now the next problem it runs into is get checksum doesn't exist, so we'll add that. And all of these times the tests are running and failing, and it's saying that something is happening. So we now have a failing test. It picked some random numbers that added up to 88,383. The reason why I'm picking random numbers is that this way we can kind of skip over the kind of trivial case of I have a row with, say, checksum of 2 and another row with a checksum of 3, and I add them up and I get 5, and then I just make my checksum return 5, and then I have to add another test. This test covers all of those cases because I can't possibly make this thing work, or it'd be pretty amazing if I could, but I can't really make it work without actually having a working implementation. So let's see what all we created. So we've got in the source of day 2 we have a spreadsheet row. This is an interface, and usually I like to go in here and add a comment so I remember what this is about. We're going to return an integer. I'm going to have that type hinted. I'll go ahead and put this here, even though there's no calls in an interface, so really it shouldn't be complaining about that at all. But it's going to return difference between largest and smallest value in the row. All right. And this comes in handy here in a bit when we get around to writing the spec for spreadsheet row. So let's go back into spreadsheet checksum, and we're going to have it add a row, and this has to be a row, so we'll type hint that. Spreadsheet row, and get checksum is going to return an int, and this one is going to return nothing. All right, so oops, let's try this again. So I'm going to have in PHPSpec, I'm going to run as spec all the day 2 stuff. So we have, it's initializable because we didn't go with the constructor injection, but our total checksum is not working. So we need to implement both of these to get that to work. So I'm going to have a place to store rows, and we'll just call that rows. So we'll say this rows equals row. And notice it's highlighted. We want to add that as a field. And rows is going to be an array of spreadsheet rows, and we'll comment that. All right, so now PHP Storm knows a bunch of stuff about what we're doing. And at this point, I could easily loop over the rows or do a number of different things, but instead I'm going to make it a little more interesting, I think, and introduce a new library, which is collections, and it comes out of Laravel. So I'm going to open up a command prompt in PHP Storm because you can't have enough command prompts, and we'll do a composer require, and I actually don't want to require the one from Laravel directly because it's in the Illuminate support package, but this one from Titan Co. Only it only has the collections and nothing else. I may have spelled that wrong. Let's see. Update dependencies. Let's go. Might have actually spelled it correctly. So it's added in nothing. Interesting. Let's try that again. So composer require, search for a package collection, and I want the Titan Co one again, which is number 5. And let's see if it'll install this time. This looks much more promising and much more like what I was expecting. So we're getting the latest and greatest of Titan Co collect. And what the collections allow us to do is treat arrays or the values in arrays like an object, or like a like a collection. Obviously, it's the name of the class. But we can do kind of higher order functions on these things and treat it all in one way, and then kind of hide the fact that we're dealing with loops elsewhere. So what that means is we can do return collect, and collect is a function that creates a new collection object, and we're going to pass in our rows from this class, and then what we want to do is sum all of the calls for each row, the call for each row to whatever that thing was that we called it. I don't remember. So we've got a sum function, and it's going to accept a callback, and we know that in each time we iterate through this row, we're getting back a spreadsheet row. And by type hinting here, it allows PHP Storm to make it so I don't have to remember the way I called that function. I can just use it, and we'll do return row get check difference. So what this does, this collect puts everything in this collection that it can use. Sum is going to automatically loop over everything in this piece right here, this rows, and for every time it gets a new spreadsheet row, it's going to call row get check difference. It's going to return that, and then sum is actually going to keep track of totaling that for us. So very, very similar to just looping over this, but it should be all working, I think. Let's give it a shot. And we have something went wrong. Let's re-kick the gulp job. There we go. All right, so it is all our tests are passing. You can see green here. So our get checksum is done, even though we don't have a row. and we don't have any way to get the data into a row, but our spreadsheet itself is acting appropriately. Let's move on to implementing a spreadsheet row. So spreadsheet row right now is an interface, which means we need to come up with a concrete class that implements spreadsheet row, or is a spreadsheet row. So let's do a description of that. So we'll go back to command line. Let's go back to this command line because of, reasons. And we'll do a describe advent day 2 and spreadsheet row. This is one part that I always kind of struggle with, right? If I name my interface in a way that I would have named my object, what do I name my object now? A lot of times I would probably go back and change my spreadsheet row to spreadsheet row interface or something like that, but I don't know that that's a great idea. So right now, just to get this done and going with, we're going to call this spreadsheet row object because of it's late and I'm not feeling super creative right now. So we're going to run that, and it says, do you want to create it? Yes, we do. Great. So now we have a spreadsheet row object, and I'm going to go and put in our strict types to start with. I think I've added them everywhere else. Oh, I missed one. We'll save that. We should be probably committing every time this happens, and I'm fairly certain that that's what's been going on. But we need to give it some behavior. So we will do add in the public, because I like public. Now, before we go too much more, I want to look at what kind of data we're looking at. So in my puzzle input over here, I've got a bunch of numbers, and they are tab separated. So we're dealing with each row is going to be a string of tab separated numbers. So it seems reasonable that I could expect to send in to the constructor a string of tab separated numbers. So let's do just that. So we'll create a let function. And let is a function in PHPSpec that runs before any other tests in our class. And in this case, it's going to run even before let initializable, and it's going to kind of, because of the function I'm going to use here, this be constructed with, it is going to indicate that we need to have a constructor. So we'll go with a real simple starting one. I'll say 1 and 4 and 9, and those \t, in case you're not familiar, are just tab characters, and I don't need \4. So I've got 1, tab 4, tab 9, and let's run that, and we should get some more generated code. So it says we need a constructor because we're using it, and now we don't have any tests on it, but it has created a constructor, so we can go see that in spreadsheet row object. And the constructor is going to take a string, and it's going to be a row, and we can come back and write the function here in just a bit. So let's go back into the spec, and what we want to do is make sure that when we have this default one, we get back an 8, right? So when we pass in 1, 4, and 9, we should get back 8. So we'll do it should get 8 for difference, right? So we'll do this. Actually, even before that, so I'm going to delete this. We're going to say it should be a spreadsheet row. And we'll say this should have type of spreadsheet row. And now when we run it, or when we save it, it fails. And when we run it here, it fails because it's not a spreadsheet row yet. It is just a spreadsheet row object. So we can go in here, and this is the reason why I put the documentation on that earlier, is because now I can hit Option Enter, add method stubs, and the documentation is going to come right in automatically to anything that I implemented there. So now we save that. It's still failing, and probably it's still failing because we're not yet returning an int. I want to verify that. Nope, it's failing because we still have this pending example. So let's get rid of that pending example for just a moment. And save. And now we're back to working. And now I can undo, put that back in place, and say this get check difference should be 8. And now we save it and it fails. And this is where we kind of go and start out with the trivial one, right? So return 8. And I'm doing that because this constructor isn't implemented, obviously, and it doesn't need to be for this particular test. But if we add another test that builds it again with different values, then we're probably going to need to implement the constructor, and we're probably going to need to actually implement get check difference. So let's do that. It should get, let's say, 100 for difference 2. All right. So this, and I can call be constructed with again here, and we'll say we want to do 200, 100, 45. Oops, I don't want that. I want tab, and then another tab, and then 164 or whatever, right? So I'm expecting that. No, that's not even going to work right. Let's try 145. Now it'll give me 100. And we construct it. I saved it, which we're not actually checking anything yet. So I'm just building the object. Now this one should fail. So get check difference should be 100. And when I save it, that does fail. Now let's go back over, and we need to actually implement this constructor, right? So I'm going to make a spot to hold values, and we'll say this values equals, and we want to explode the string that comes in on tabs for that row, right? So we'll pass in the row, it explodes it. This is still not passing, and I need to add this field, and it is a type of array, and it already figured that out because it knows explode returns an array. And now we need to actually use this to get the difference. So we have a couple of options. Since we're introducing collections in here, we may as well use collect. So we can do, we'll do min equals collect on values and min, and the min does take a function if we want to pass it, but in this case it automatically will deal with numbers, and same with max. So we'll do collect this values max, and then we will return the difference. So return max minus min. We'll save that, and it's passing. So now we have a working spreadsheet row object. We have a working spreadsheet checksum object. And now what we need to do is make something that can put those together and use them. And that, let's see, where do we want to put that? This was a couple of years ago, last year or the year before. I would do this in a test runner. Seems like a fairly logical place to do that, but I want to make something that works with both of these things. So let's make a loader that can take a file or a string or something. It'll take the input and build a spreadsheet row object, or sorry, a spreadsheet checksum filled with spreadsheet row objects that corresponds and gets the right answer, so we can pass in all of the test data. So let's make another class. So we're going to describe advent day 2 data loader, and we'll run it, create the data loader. I did something wrong. Oh, I did the wrong slashes. I mean, they're the right ones for PHP, but they're the wrong ones for the command line unless I want to quote things, which I don't. Let's see what it created. So we have a That is wrong. So we're deleting that spec. And we're deleting that. And let's try this again. Yes. All right, there we go. So now we have a data loader spec. We have a data loader. And the data loader, we'll fix it up here with a couple of things. And each time I'm just manually saving. PHPStorm automatically saves whenever I lose focus or go to another file, but in this case I'm hitting Command S and saving automatically, so each of those lines of code that I changed didn't cause us to break anything, so it was a single line of code change and we committed. And we're at 15 right now. Cool. Alright, so now we need to pass in data, right? So I'm going to copy out the example code from here, so say 5195, and I'm going to just stick this down here to hold on to so I can use it in a second. Alright, so let's say the data loader is going to receive the array of data from the file, and it's going to return back a checksum object filled with the appropriate row objects. At least that's the plan. All right. So we'll do public function. It will build a spreadsheet checksum. All right, and we'll say this. You know what? I was going to use a static function for this, but I don't remember how to do those. So we'll make this so this is essentially going to be a factory, I guess. So build checksum, and we're going to pass in all of this stuff as an array of strings. Because there's a PHP function that we can get that will give us an array of this stuff. So we'll do 5195, but I think when I pasted it in here it automatically converted to spaces, so I'm just going to use it as reference now. 519 tab 5 and 7 tab 5 tab 3, finally 2 tab 4 tab 6 tab 8. Alright, and since we didn't give any way in the spreadsheet checksum to get back the rows, we're going to have to assume that it's working properly. But what we can do is we'll store the result of this call. So say this result equals that, and we'll say result should have type of spreadsheet checksum, and result. So in order to get type hinting on this, I'm going to say result here is a spreadsheet checksum, which will now let result act like a spreadsheet checksum, and I can say result get checksum should be 18. Alright, and so if we build the loader properly, that's what should happen. Alright, and at this point I can get rid of those because I don't need them. And we are broken because we don't have the data loader loading, or factorying, or whatever you want to call it. So we'll make a strict, and let's build it. So, oh yeah, let's run the spec and have it generate that code, that function method for, or that function signature for us. So we did, and we got null. And we're going to get an array of strings, which I could type in this as an array, but I'm going to use variadics and say all of these rows must be strings. So then I've kind of got a double set of type checking, right? It's an array of strings, and I don't have to write any special code for that. And then build checksum is going to take each of these rows and add them to the spreadsheet checksum, and it's going to return the spreadsheet checksum. So let's build that, and actually let's even start over again. So this is how I want the signature to look. Let's go back over here. I'm going to comment this out for just a minute, and I'm going to say we want to make sure that if we get no rows in the spreadsheet checksum, that we could get a 0 checksum. That seems like a sane thing. So it will build a 0 checksum spreadsheet for no rows. All right, so now we'll do result equals this build checksum with an empty array, and result should have type of spreadsheet checksum, and result get checksum should be 0. All right, let's see how that looks for us. Still failing, as expected. And there we go. Must be of type string, but array given. Oh yeah, because it's variadics, right? I need to spread that out, so we'll spread that out. I've actually never done this one with a blank array, but let's see what happens. Must be an instance of spreadsheet checksum none returned. So that's where we want to be. All right, so back on data loader, all I need to do now, maybe, is build and return a spreadsheet checksum. So checksum equals new spreadsheet checksum and return the same. And now we run, and everything is green, which is good. This little highlight here is telling me that this line could be combined with the others, because I could just return the new spreadsheet checksum, but I know in just a minute I'm going to want that, so I'm not going to do its suggestion. So let's now uncomment this. That should fail some things. And as we just saw, it's expected to be a string, but I gave it an array, so we need to spread that out with the other side of the variadic. I don't know what that one's called. It's spread, I think, in JavaScript. Maybe it's spread in PHP. So now when we pass that in, we expected 18, but instead we got 0, and that's because we're not doing anything yet in the loader. So now let's go back over to the loader, and I think, again, I'm going to run, I'm going to use collections on this, right? So we'll say collect on rows, because despite what it says, despite how we passed it in, rows is actually now an array of strings, even though what we did when we passed it in with the ... on the other side means that it spread it all out into individual arguments. So we now have a collection of rows, and I want to do something for each of those, which actually, yeah, that's how I want to do it. I want to do individual ones. So we'll do each, and we'll take a function, and that function is going to be taking a string, because each individual row in rows is a string, so it's a row. And in that, I want to build a new row. So row equals new spreadsheet row object, and it takes row as its input. That's an unfortunately named set of things, so let's call this something else. Let's say data, which means this needs to be data. And now we can pass this into checksum. So we'll take checksum, and hopefully it notices that that's not a thing, so we can add it to the closure automatically. And we're going to add a row, which is a row, and then semicolon down here. This all can be inlined as well, so I'm going to cut this out. Actually, before I do that, let's get to green, and then I'll come back and we can refactor a little bit. So we expected still integer 18, but we got 0. We have our rows hopefully being built properly, and our checksum, it's adding the row to it, and then it's returning that value, and so it should be 18, and we have got integer 0. Did we actually implement get checksum? We did. All right. I'm at a bit of a loss, which probably means that I went a little bit too far with all of the things that I did. Let's see how much we've changed. So we added the collection, the build sum. That isn't working as expected just yet, and we uncommented this test. So that's not all that much really. With everything else working as expected, let's see. Come on, brain. I'm going to pause the video for a minute and think. All right, I'm back. So ended up that I had to do a little bit more than just thinking. I actually had to get the debugger going, which it wasn't installed. I had to install it, all that. So it turns out when I was running through the debugger, what I found is that my first row was being built with 519 blank, and the second row was 753, and the third row was 2468. But if you notice, you can see the error right here, but if we go back to the data, it should be 5195. So it turns out that what happened is I accidentally escaped the 5, which you probably all noticed, and were screaming at your monitors telling me that I screwed up there, but sorry, couldn't hear you. So we'll put that in place, and now we should get something that's a lot better, like all green passing tests, right? However, I do have one other thing that I wanted to change, and this is the time to do it when it's green, is that what I noticed in the debugger is, we're splitting a string by tabs, which results in strings, but I don't want strings, I want integers. That's what I'm supposed to have. So if we go back over into this here function, what we can do is change this out as well for some collection goodness, right? So if we do everything correct, then all the things should still pass. So we'll say this values equals collect on row, and we want to start out with, maybe I can't do it on collect to start. Maybe I can't. All right, so we're going to start out with collect on explode row. So we're going to do collect on this. So we'll do, that was weird, collect on explode row. Now we have a collection, and I want to change each of the values that come out of that explosion into actual ints, right? So for that, I'm going to use a map function. And map takes a function that we're going to pass in, and it's going to be an individual value, so we'll call it string, but what it represents is a number. And I can even type int here and say, well, it needs to be an int on the way out. And all I'm going to do is just cast. So we're going to cast that string to an integer and return that. And now everything should still be green. But now inside of the actual row we have actual strings, which is actually what we want. So now, with all of that in mind, we have a data loader that takes an array that builds up our checksum spreadsheet, and it's filled with row objects. So now we need to make a test for the big chunk of data that comes from our test over here, or from Advent of Code rather. So I'm going to copy all of this. Let's see, what would be a good way to do this? Let's say probably just saving it as a file. So let's put it into, seems like it's test related a little bit, so we'll put it into here. I'm going to make a directory, call it data, and a file, we'll call it day2.tsv. Yes. And I think, yep, this time we retained all of our tabs. So that's what it looks like when the tabs are not all nice. We'll save that, and I think even saving that probably didn't do anything, and it says we're broken here for some reason. Let's see if that's true. Doesn't appear to be true. Not staged for commit. Let's go ahead and stage those so those get checked in at some point here too. Alright, so get status. We'll add composer JSON and composer lock. Those were added for the collection stuff. We'll add in the gulp changes, and we'll add in the data file. I actually have to add it. Alright, and now any change that we make to the source, the PHP objects, like add a space and save it, and delete the space and save it, we should have gotten some commits for that. Great. So now in the data loader spec, we want to use that as our input. So we'll say public function, it will solve day 2 part 1. So let's see, the PHP function that I want is the one that gives me back the array when I load a file. Say data equals file. That looks like the right one. So file, we're going to load starting from the directory we're at, and it's going to be in the data directory, day2.tsv. There's our data. And we'll do result. Man, that's weird. I must be hitting something. Result equals this, nope, build checksum from data, and result should be 1, 2, 3. Right? I have no idea what it is. That's kind of our point here, and I need to spread that out. Alright, and it failed as expected because we don't know what the answer is. Oh yeah, because result is, I missed my call. We need to call result get checksum should be 1, 2, 3, because result itself is just the spreadsheet checksum. Now when we run it, it says you didn't get 1, 2, 3, you get 4, 8, 3, 5, 7. So we'll take that back over to Advent of Code, and we'll plop that in and see if that is the right answer. It is, and I'm now up to 4 stars. So if you watched the previous video, I said I was doing all these live, and I was, other than I read them each night. You know, I'm behind. They're on day 5 and an hour and 20 minutes away from being on day 6. But on day 4, I went in and looked at it and accidentally solved the first part of day 4 using a text editor and a guess. So I didn't do any code for that one, and so I got my star for that one a little bit early. But anyway, with that, I think that ends the 3rd video this year. So the end of the day 2 part 1 solution, and I'll stop the video and I'll start another one here in a couple of minutes. Thanks for watching.